So I've also got, this team of fantastic writers working with me, but also 19-year-olds who are using slang I don't understand. And they'll send me a joke, and I'm like, okay, explain to me the 9 things this is referencing. And he's like, okay, this is about this and this and this. And I'm like, oh, great. Well, that's incredibly funny then. Let's send it to him. Let's put it up. Let's do it.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do? I'd like to know the things that specifically make you.
Hello, I'm Tim Barnes. You are The Genre, and in each episode of this show, I ask someone about the first genres that inspired them, the first crafts that they pursued, and how they feel about those first pursuits now. Doesn't that sound exciting? Like such a great concept for a podcast? In this episode, I'm talking to comedian and writer Andrew Nadeau. Andrew is a Chicago comedian known for his one-liners and dry sense of humor. He's written for both The Dad and Netflix's Family social media. He was named funniest person on Twitter by the Chicago Tribune. His work has been featured in publications including McSweeney's, Point and Case, Huffington Post, Funny or Die, and College Humor. But more than that, Andrew Nadeau is also the founder of Persona Essential Social Media Management, which sounds like business lingo jazz, but he makes it fun. I think he's doing what so many people are realizing they need to do in the arts, which is kind of become a, dare I say, entrepreneur. A little bit of housekeeping before we get into the episode. If you are enjoying the show, please give it a nice rating or review wherever you're listening to it. It goes a long way, and I really appreciate it. And if you're a paid subscriber to my newsletter wondering, hey, where are my advanced episodes? Those are going to be trickling out throughout the week. So you're going to be all caught up on the advanced goodies for the podcast. In this episode, we talk a lot about the holy trinity of comedy. That's right, chronic illness, grief, and business. And you know what? I don't think I ever met Andrew in person. I think we met online during one of the mini Zoom comedy shows that popped up during the quarantine era of the pandemic. But since then, I've been in awe of his comedy writing chops. It is truly difficult to make consistently hilarious one-liners in this era of the internet. Yet Andrew somehow does it. So please enjoy this conversation with Andrew Nadeau. What's the origin of that last name?
French Canadian.
French Canadian.
So the lamest French you can be. Yeah.
How in touch are you with the sort of French and Canadian portions of your history?
Oh, God, I don't think at all. In fact, my dad would pronounce the name Nadeau, which was like the American pronunciation. Okay. And we'd always refer to him as Rich Nadeau, just out of habit. And then friends would say, like, I thought your last name was Nadeau. And it's like, yeah, it is. And it's like, why do you have different names? I was like, well, because we're not willing, to commit to this colonization of our ancestry, or also very white ancestry.
So you're in America. You grew up in America.
I did.
In the U.S. proper.
Yeah, no, it was just my grandfather was born on a farm in Canada.
Okay.
So that was pretty much our history, was occasionally hearing as a child, you don't know how easy you have it. Because, he would have this story about in the morning, he would wake up early and he'd put on 7 pairs of gloves. And when the last pair of gloves froze to the rake or the hoe or whatever the implement was, that was when he could go inside, because he would just have to keep taking them off as they froze to it.
I think we first met during the height of the pandemic, where there were all these internet Zoom comedy shows and things like that. And when what show was it? I think you booked me on a show.
Yeah. We had you on the podcast I had at the time. Here's Where It Went Wrong, which was a show where we would have a comedian come on and pick a topic they would love, and then we would trace the history of it to find out what ruined it. So you came on and you were obviously doing Yub Nub at the time. So you're like, we've Star Wars and I've got opinions.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. But even on like the sort of stand-up shows.
Yeah, because we had Cabin Fever too at the very start of the pandemic, which was just giving comedians a space to, is like, we know we're all dying from lack of attention here. this isn't the same, but let me give you some people you can yell your opinions at.
Yeah.
So yeah, that one was a lot of fun. I let us work with so many comedians that, I'm Chicago based, so we've got some great comics here, but there are so many in LA and New York. So yeah, it let us work with a lot of comics that wouldn't normally get to work with.
And seeing those shows, it made me realize, okay, this guy has a deep love and passion for well-crafted one-liners. And I started following you on Twitter. Like, you have such a following. How did you, one... Is it the magic of a well-crafted one-liner on Twitter? Is that what you would say is the secret sauce of your success there?
I mean, I think that was it. That was always my favorite growing up, was Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright. Actually, I started writing these jokes because I didn't like social media, and I had just moved to Chicago, and my sister said, look, you got to get on Facebook, because people are going to want to interact with you once you start hanging out. And I started writing jokes there, and then I was told, like, this isn't the place for that. This is the place for terrible opinions from your aunt. Go to Twitter. Yeah, I made sure to write. I mean, I just tend to overcommit to things, so I wrote at least one joke, typically closer to 10, every day for 4 years.
That's great.
Yeah. That was it. It was like, it turns out I enjoy this. Let me go way too hard at it until I get good, because in the beginning I was terrible, as all comedians are when we start. And it was like, all right, if this is going to be like, one of those things that takes years to learn, let me see how many I can get a day to get better faster.
Yeah, let me actually treat it like work. I feel like that's the smartest thing that you could have done, and something that I think people kind of forget that you have the ability to do. Like, you don't necessarily have to be in a physical space. You can just write jokes wherever you are, and do that with some consistency.
Yeah, I think the big challenge is honestly being in a good enough mental space to be able to do it. Or, as so many of us do, learn to turn your bad mental space into fodder for this.
Yes,
because it's going to come out some way. So if you can make it come out funny, then that feels like the target.
Yeah, and I feel like that's where it gets interesting, because you don't necessarily know. Like, you hope that people are laughing at the same thing. Like, right. I've been doing this thing since all of the internet is crumbling or reassembling. Right. It's hard to tell, but I email 5 jokes a day by 11 a.m. Eastern, and I have had that struggle because it's both time. There's a time constraint, and there's a number to it. And anything could be going on in my life that morning before I'm writing those jokes. And sometimes I post it and I'm like, I don't know if these are jokes. I don't know if these are just depressing facts.
Right. No, that's so interesting too, when you're so immersed. And that's great that, like, I don't have the same dedication to that time and number that, because in the beginning it was a hobby, and it was easy for me to be obsessive, because it was like, well, I want to be better at this. 10 a day is easy, because honestly they're mostly pretty bad. And I was still training my brain to, kind of go into this. And then once this becomes a career, it's so much harder to sit down, because you're so burned out from all of the other aspects that take that creative energy, whether it's producing and organizing a show, or in your case, you've got the podcast, you've got the writing job. It's a lot to balance. And suddenly it's like, God, 10 jokes a day. I probably said 10 funny things, but putting it together in this is my packet, this is what's presentable to the world, is a very different approach, and a lot harder when it's suddenly your career.
Yeah. That balance between hobby and craft is an important division. I'm curious to know, as we dive into the heart of this podcast, Andrew, what was the first genre that called out to you when you were a kid?
I think when I was a kid, it was 2 things. It was jokes that only I found funny. Was one of the big things, where it was like, I know nobody else gets this, but this is so weird that it's so funny to me. And that's what led me to a lot of the Mitch Hedberg, Stephen Wright stuff, where it was absurdism. At the time, I had no idea what absurdism was, but it was like, you have to buy in to the world that they've created, where this is reasonable for this insane situation, whether it's a talking animal or an insane interaction, to make sense. And then fantasy. Once I saw Buffy the Vampire Slayer, the TV series, not the movie.
Not the movie, yeah.
Because I was probably about 12 when that came out. And it's interesting, because I rewatched it a couple years ago and was like, oh, this actually isn't realistic dialogue for how humans talk in the real world, but it fit perfectly in their world. Like the interactions, the quick asides, the jokes, the comic relief. It was all very fitting for the world they built. But I remember watching it at the time thinking, I'm just going to start doing this in real life. And it was like, no, you need someone to play off of. What you need is a writer writing both sides of the conversation.
Yeah.
You can't
wait. What do you mean I'm going to start doing this in real life? What's an example of that?
Early episode, they had a joke where someone said carpe diem, and they said, "You mean fish of the day?" And it was like, it's a simple throwaway, mistaking carp for carpe, and it was like, okay, I can find a situation to use a joke like this. All I need is someone who knows a little bit of Latin and isn't too smart. and that was the kind of stuff where I'd immediately go to Google and be like, what are some common Latin phrases? What are some other things I can do with this? And instead of being like, this situation isn't repeatable, what you're looking for here is a straight man. What you're looking for here is someone to play off of.
So you were, based on your love of those moments in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, you were building up an arsenal waiting for a straight man to enter your life.
Exactly.
So that you could...
my lack of understanding for how this worked. Instead of like, the obvious conclusion is, oh, I like writing. What I like is the person behind this joke, but it took me like another decade to realize that's what I loved.
And then, okay, so you mentioned the jokes that you found that you were the only person who loved. I mean, how often were you watching stand-up specials, or is there an example of this just like in your everyday life beyond something that a comedian put together?
I mean, I don't think there was much. I mean, I think as a kid, you have the very common thing where you get a laugh and you're like, I'm going to say this 100 more times.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, you don't even know why it was funny, but you know it got the laugh and you want that reaction. And then as you get older, it's I don't know. I remember one that obviously everyone loved at the time. The Adam Sandler movie where he went back, had to do all of the school from like grade 1 on again. I'm blanking on the name, but we'll get that in post. I watched that at a sleepover, and it was the funniest thing I'd ever seen. And I insisted we rent it the next week. And I watched it with my father, who just sat stone-faced through the entire thing. And it was one of those where I keep looking at him and like, is this not as funny as I remembered? Or what? So, you know, at the time, as a kid, maybe it was a character I invented, or silly voices, or things that was like, it was more for me than anyone else. It was just I was playing around with words and voices, which I was never very good at, but I liked kind of building up worlds. So it was either combining characters, or this was what this character would sound like if he was in this world, which was primarily, you know, whatever you're seeing on TV. At the time, I was watching Mickey Mouse, and The Mask had just come out. So it was Mickey Mouse being Jim Carrey, and it was just funny in my head. That was it. It's what it so often is as a kid. I think the difference was that I kept doing it despite it was only funny to me.
I feel like people don't at least really dive into what happens when you're laughing at something.
Yeah,
because it really tells you so much about yourself.
Yeah.
At a stand-up show, a part of the joy is the communal laugh. You feel connected to everyone in the room, but there's nothing quite like the laugh when you are kind of the only person who feels heard by a premise or a joke.
Right. Well, and you know that feeling too, when you're doing a show and you get a sparse laugh, but you realize everyone that laughed was a comic in the audience.
Yeah.
And it was like, this was just a joke for other writers. It was no regular person going to find this funny, but the writers are like, oh, I see the process for how they got there. And God, my mom had this joke that was her favorite joke ever. It was one of those like a guy walks into a bar kind of jokes. In my life, she has probably tried to tell this joke a dozen times and has never been able to tell it because she starts cracking up partway through every time. And it's not even a great joke. It's basically the premise is a guy asks for a tailored suit. They tailor it wrong, and they keep convincing him he just has to pose his body differently until he looks hobbled. He's walking down the street, and 2 women pass by and say, "Oh, look at that poor man." And the other one says, "Yeah, well, that's a great suit." You know, it's fine if you do it while you're actually putting on a sport coat. It can be a little funny.
Yeah.
But it was one where it was like, I think her dad told her this joke when she was a kid. And because of that, it is the funniest thing she's ever heard in her head.
Sometimes there's the joke where it's not even the words, it's not even the content, it's not even the setup and the punchline, it's just the sound. It's just the rhythm of it. And those are the ones where I don't know why I'm laughing, but the rhythm of it is just so funny.
It's so much is. I remember talking with Skylar Higley.
Oh yeah.
Who is
so funny.
He's so funny. And I for years said I thought he was one of the funniest comics in Chicago, and we just lost him. He just moved to LA because he's writing for After Midnight now. And he had this joke where he told it and got a big laugh, and I talked about it afterwards, and he said, I tried that for a while and it didn't work. And he said, but like, I've been doing this long enough. I know this is funny. I understand comedy enough to know this should work. And he's like, it needed a 2-second pause. It needed a pause for the audience to understand where I was going to go with it so they could catch up. And I've got a couple of those jokes where I use specifically when I'm trying to reset the pacing, where it's one where like some jokes I actually won't do if I don't have a drink on stage, because I need to just let the audience sit with it long enough to get it. One that I'm sure won't relay well on a podcast, but just to get the concept is a lot of times people ask me, Andrew, you need to learn the difference between questions and statements. And it's just waiting long enough for the audience to connect and realize like, oh, the joke was that he still doesn't understand what they are. The problem is you have to wait either way. And sometimes it's not going to work and you're waiting for nothing. So yeah, the pacing is a very challenge. Also, one that I still laugh at thinking about. I'm blanking on all of the names now of the most famous comedians of all time. The Carol Burnett show. Bit they did where it was one of the ones where it was famous for everyone breaking because he just went off on a tangent, and it was just describing the sound that Siamese elephants made hooked with the trunk, and he was like, so they couldn't roar, they just went Yorkin. And I think I laughed for 2 weeks thinking of the word Yorkin right before I fell asleep.
Wait, you were watching the Carol Burnett show?
Oh yeah, I still go back and rewatch Carol Burnett sometimes.
Wait, are you an example of white don't crack? How old are you?
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't watching it live, but yeah, it was definitely one of those that I'm always been big into research too. So once I got into comedy, it was like, well, okay, well, let's see how we got here, I guess. Go watch 50 years of this.
I'm the same way. When I first moved to Chicago, for some reason, I was, didn't have a lot of, I was going to the library all the time. And I remember reading this biography of Louis Armstrong and like really just soaking up the information about his years in Chicago.
Right.
And like books about like Milton Berle. Like, I don't know why I'm, you know what I mean? Like, why am I focused on that element of...
It's weird because I totally know what you mean too, where I definitely felt in the beginning like there was a lot of, you have to understand the rules to be able to break them. So there was like, okay, I got to go understand the process. I'm also a Jewish comic, only one, which is crazy. But no, there was such a history of like the Borscht Belt, and I grew up on Mel Brooks. He was such an inspiration to me that it was like, all right, so how did we do this? Because people aren't crazy about us. So why were they letting us make them laugh? And then reading about that history, it's like, oh, okay, it's like, we started Hollywood, so they had to.
So what were you learning about yourself based on the jokes that you found that sometimes you're the only one laughing at, or the jokes that like are in your collection of this defines me?
That's a good question. I think in the beginning, I was really scared of it because I felt like if I'm the only one who finds this funny, what am I doing here? And then it became a bit more of like, no, there are other people. You have to find them. And you have to be able to sell yourself. But eventually it was like, write what you find funny. You will find people that agree with you. And I think the big thing that I was learning was just that it was important to me to have a backstory in my head. Like, because for me, I found it funny because I built up this world that this character lives in. So, well, of course, this is regular behavior for him. And when I was just writing jokes to begin with, when I first started doing stand-up, I came out in this very melancholy character because a lot of my jokes were kind of sad. And I thought, okay, the idea is this guy doesn't want to be there. Someone's making him be on stage and he's just telling you about his day. And it was a good safety net because I was too scared to just get up and be myself and trust people that people would get it.
I'm interested in this idea of you on stage as character, because I think that I am trying to get out of the concept of me on stage being a character. Yeah. And that's kind of the scariest thing, figuring out who am I simply being Tim Barnes on stage. I feel like the greatest example of that is actually like what Stephen Colbert has been doing with his late night show. Yeah. The first couple of years of that show, I felt worried about him, and I could tell that he felt worried about him because he had been playing a character for so long.
How do I Colbert Report, right? And now I just need to trust that people are going to get me. And you're right. That must have been an insane transition. And so, what do you feel is the difference between you in real life versus you on stage?
Well, it's. I never talked about actual things in my life. It was always heightened and absurd. And it's interesting. My friend Ian Abramson, who I went to high school with, we both.
Yeah. Moved to Chicago.
He just moved back to Chicago. Yeah. I don't know if he's ever not going to be. I don't know if he stopped being a character on stage. I don't believe he has. I think that he is a surreal entity when he enters the stage.
We're actually having him on my show next month for the first time. Yeah.
And I had a similar surreality, but not to that extent. But it was always basically I'm an alien who crash landed here, and I'm just like everything is just kind of just flowing through my brain and not processing correctly.
Right, which is how you create Maurice on Mars, though, is
exactly.
that you think about things like that.
Exactly. And now it is the daunting thing of like, I've never had any true bits about relationships or true bits about family or true bits about growing up. It's always been sprinkled in there, but for me, the light at the end of the tunnel is always reaching that absurd thing. And I don't know, is that what I want? Or do I want a genuine dark expression of the soul? Is that even,
And it was interesting. It was actually why I liked having the podcast while I was doing stand-up, because I felt like I got to tell real stories, but still have this separation. But then eventually, as I got more comfortable, like, again, like the character used to come out and he was looking down all the time. I would let my voice crack. You know, he was sad to be there. It was all, it made sense for the world. But then eventually I was like, you know what? I'm feeling comfortable up here now, and I want to talk to the audience a little bit.
Oh, yeah.
What if I have a new idea that doesn't fit with this character? What if I have a happy story all of a sudden? This doesn't work. And I realized how limited I was just because I was scared. So eventually I was like, all right, just plan a couple crowd work things. Spoiler for the audience, a lot of your crowd work stuff, we know what's going to be said roughly in response. You know, we have an idea what we're going to say back. But the hard part of that too is that, you know, our stand-up jokes, we've told them 1,000 times. We don't laugh at that anymore. I still laugh pretty big when I find something funny. I'm not good at hiding that. So it was like, all right, if I'm going to do crowd work, it's got to be okay that I laugh. So not, by the way, for any other people watching, don't get into stand-up because you want to do crowd work. This is a scourge on the industry at the moment. It was nice to be able to, like, you know, occasionally something funny would happen and I wanted to interact with it. I wanted to feel comfortable. I wanted to feel, you know, safe. You're taking a risk putting yourself out there, but also like, I believe in what I'm doing. I've been doing this a while now. I trust in my material. I trust I can be funny. So yeah, let me try it straight. And, you know, really the only difference now is that I'm less enthusiastic. In real life, I get very excited very easily. On stage, I'm pretty monotone. I keep it relatively chill. But yeah, it feels a lot more like myself up there, and it has made it more fun. But there also is the safety net of I'm almost never telling a real story. You're not as vulnerable.
I think it's great that you found that space, because the journey of a stand-up comic, it can be quite genuine, of like, I am searching for my true authentic voice and I am searching for the audience that identifies with it. And then it can be surface. It can be, I'm searching for the character that I know networks are looking for.
Right. Oh, and that's a big thing too, where I see so many comics and, you know, it used to be they see your talent and they help you build the audience. And now they want you to come with the audience. They want you to have that 100,000 followers. And the way to get that isn't necessarily being the funniest. It's being the best at social media.
And oddly feels like a full circle to an element of like the Chitlin circuit, an element of characters. You know what I mean? Like these TikTok characters. I think we are in some way through the digital process circling back to an older style of entertainment.
Yeah, I think so too. And I mean, you might remember the influx after Vine went down, where a lot of them tried to get into stand-up.
Yeah.
And they were booked right away because of their success. But like these are different skill sets. The same way that, you know, when I went from writing short form to stand-up and then went from stand-up to writing scripts, it was like, yeah, you're going to be bad for a little while. It's, you know, you've got an understanding here, but this is a new muscle you've got to learn to flex.
So you were a comedy nerd, a linguistic nerd. You love the combination of things to get a joke. You're always waiting for someone to say the right thing to tee up something that you may have planned 10 years prior.
Never happens, by the way. It is not worth the effort.
Which also suggests that you have a passion for situations, right? Because that's the joy of a sitcom or comedic dialogue. It's like so-and-so says this, they enter this room, someone else walks in, they say this, that triggers this. You know, the beauty of that almost God's eye.
Right. It's very satisfying. And then once I actually became a writer, it was interesting because you see how hard it is to get that without making it obvious.
Yeah.
Where the challenge is, if you control both sides of the conversation, you can get any setup and then the punchline. The hard part is having it happen in a way where you don't see it coming. Because, the setup is almost always going to give away the punchline if you're just putting it out there.
Yeah, you got to have these little things. It's always great when people are doing something while they're talking, too.
Yeah, it took me so long to understand what it was that I liked about this, that, you know, there was a lot of time, too, where I'd see a comedian and be like, okay, let me try doing that. And then I like that. Well, that doesn't work. And until eventually it was like, just put down the thing you find funny. Stop trying to make it anything else. Find these 20 words that when they're put together, make you laugh, move them around until you laugh harder. That's the starting place for your joke.
So with all that in mind, what is the first craft that you would say you pursued? Was it comedy related? Was it word related?
It was comedy related. It really was social media and diving in. When I was a kid, I wrote scripts and I acted a bit in like the school plays and elementary and middle school kind of stuff. But it was something where I had fun with it, but never really considered it as a career. And then, are we okay if I tell you a bit of a bummer history here that leads to why I ended up all this?
Absolutely.
Is this good content?
That's what this show is about. Let's get to your true genre here.
So I'm disabled and I have an illness called myalgic encephalomyelitis, and I had to leave school when I was 11, and I was housebound for a while and, you know, going out a little bit while we're trying to figure this out. Then in my mid-20s, it got really bad and I was pretty much bedridden for 5 years. So from 24 to 29, it was just you lie very still and you create worlds in your head. And that was it. Obviously, I'm in a much better place now. I still have a ways to go, but I'm able to work. I'm able to live a fulfilling life. But these worlds existed so much in my head, and I missed out on a lot of the socialization skills that you get during your 20s and even, you know, high school years. So there was this lot of stuff that were like, it made sense to me, but I had to see how it worked out in the real world. And writing jokes on social media became the way that I could interact with people, where it was like, I don't really get how much I'm supposed to share here. I'm used to keeping everything to myself, but jokes are safe. Jokes, everyone loves a joke.
Yeah.
So I started writing. I got well enough to start taking some classes, and I was pre-med at the time. And then I relapsed, not too far, but enough that I had to leave school. And I was really upset about it. And I thought, let me just write more because I'm sad and I want to laugh. And after about a year of that, I realized I wasn't going back to school. Like, this was what I wanted to do with my life. This was the best way I could have possibly spent my time, was making people laugh. So at that time, it was just writing jokes on Twitter, and that started to grow. And I started to get some low paying jobs. Here's $50 if we use your joke. I wrote a greeting card for a greeting card company where it was like, this is incredible. I'm getting paid $150 to write a greeting card that I was told up front would almost certainly never be used.
I have beat the system.
Yeah. but that was it. I dove in. I then started trying stand up. And it was so writing short form comedy was absolutely the first one where I was like, really, this is an art form I get. It somehow took me 20 years to put together that my favorite comedian in the world, or comedians Mitch Hedberg and Stephen Wright, was also the type of comedy I wanted to write. For some reason, it felt untouchable. Like, well, only those guys can do it. You're not allowed to do it. So once I realized, no, you can give it a try. You can. It's they don't have it patented.
Don't scroll away. You Are the Genre. We'll be right back after the break. You Are the Genre is an independently produced podcast, so if you'd like to support it in any way, please give it a nice rating or review, subscribe to the newsletter for free for regular updates on the show, and other things going on in the wacky world of Tim Barnes. But if you upgrade to a paid subscription to the newsletter, you get advanced episodes plus other goodies. I usually use this break in the middle of the podcast to talk about something that I've simply been enjoying. I don't have any paid sponsors. You Are the Genre isn't brought to you by MeUndies or ZipRecruiter. Why did I even say those two things? This really is not an ad. I want you to understand that. Those are just the two things that popped in my mind. Anyway, something that I recently saw and really enjoyed was a live show at a place called Asylum NYC. It was a performance called Cowboys by the comedy trio Business Casual. And it was a really, really good time. I'm not just saying that because Business Casual and I share the same manager. It was amazing to watch three people dressed as cowboys with maybe 4 or 5 props make an extravaganza that felt like seeing an epic movie. And I was there for the first show, so it's going to get better every single time. It's happening at Asylum NYC every Friday at 9:30 p.m. until September 20th. So if you're in New York, I really think you should check it out. And you know what else I think you should really do? Subscribe to my newsletter. Get all of the information you need at youarethegenre.com. Now, back to the episode. Where were we? It's interesting. Mitch Hedberg, I remember watching his Comedy Central Presents when I was a kid. It was on TV. And then my dad walked in. And as a kid, I didn't get it. And I was like, this guy is not doing stand-up.
Right.
And my dad walks in and finds it hilarious, which is odd in retrospect because you go through those years where it's like, my dad doesn't understand me, doesn't understand, my sensibility. But now Mitch Hedberg is one of those comedians that I truly like. It's so weird to know that the child version of me didn't get it. And now as I've gotten older, it's like, he is one of those defining comics. Yes. And then someone like Stephen Wright, you watch some of his specials and he is so still.
Yeah.
Making a huge crowd laugh. He's not pacing the stage. He's barely moving. And it makes you ask yourself so many questions like, does he even need to be here?
Do you remember when you were brand new trying to figure out how you should stand and how you should
how to
hold
grab
your
the mic? Yeah, all that stuff. Yeah.
And it was intense in the beginning because you're so aware of every single movement before you're comfortable. And then eventually you find something that fits with you. But Stephen Wright, he just stood there. And I mean, Mitch Hedberg, obviously he had that horrible stage fright. He stared at the ground the entire, like how funny do you have to be able to stare at the ground, not engage with your audience? And the joke just kills.
Yeah.
But I mean, also too, I'd heard with him where he was very aware that some audiences wouldn't get it. And as a one-liner comic, I've got some things I can switch to, but I realize why he did what he did, which was just keep going anyway. Because ultimately, if you've committed to an absurdist style of one-liner comedy and they don't like it, they're not going to like you. And I've had, when people come up to you after a show and it's like, you could have just said the nice thing, but instead you say the mean thing first. Where I've had comments that like people come up multiple times and say like, for the first 5 minutes, I really didn't know what you were doing there. And then I was like, oh, I get it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was, I completely forgot what the original question was.
Oh no. Yeah. It was more of an observation, but, I'm really enjoying this conversation because I haven't had one where we're just kind of like talking about comedy itself just yet. For me, Stephen Wright was an example of that sort of alien idea. Like he feels like someone from another planet,
right?
Who is just
well. And speaking of Dad's reaction to comedy, when my dad passed away a couple years ago, shortly before he did, I showed him "I Think You Should Leave." And it was my dad's thing where if he likes a joke, he'll laugh, but he'll be in the audience and he just tends to sit with his arms crossed in general, and he doesn't give you a courtesy laugh if he doesn't like it. He'll laugh big when he likes it and no laugh if he doesn't. And the first show of mine he came to, we had a comedian on who was very weird, and he came back and he said, "God, there's this one guy in the front row that I can't break," and he had the absolute right attitude. He said, whenever I see that, though, I play to them. He said, I just want to make them laugh. So he said he watched him the entire set and saw what it was. But anyway, I showed my dad, I think you should leave, because I said, like, comedians are talking about this like it's the future of comedy, which in terms of it was an acceptance of absurdism. It was very heavy-handed characters where it was just you either buy it or you don't. And it was so brave of them to commit so hard to this. And I assume some of the people that have been in these sketches where they said like, yeah, we shot an hour of material for this 4-minute sketch. So my father watched the entire thing completely silently, and when it was over, he said, this is the future of comedy? I was like, no, you don't get the doors this is opening. It doesn't all have to be absurd, but it's showing that people can do something unexpected and different and weird, and that there is an audience for it. It's opening doors in the sense that I feel like it made a lot of comedians braver.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a point of connection with, I Think You Should Leave, Jim Carrey's career and Adam Sandler. So the fact that he didn't get that Adam Sandler movie years ago.
Oh, that's a good point too. It was funny because as a kid, I was not a big other than that one. I didn't really get Jim Carrey and Adam Sandler for me, because I think partially because it was all about like the words for me. And I was like, yeah, this is a fun character, but it's so big. If the words are right, shouldn't you not need that? I was just the most pompous 11-year-old where it was like, focus on your writing, guys. It's a craft. Instead of recognizing like, no, there's a lot of different kinds of funny.
So I don't recall the name of the condition that you have, but how exactly does it manifest in your life? Like what happens?
ME is the easy term for it. For me, basically, it feels like a flu most of the time. During the bedridden years, there was a lot of muscle and joint pain, which is why I couldn't really walk. So yeah, for the most part, it just kind of feels like I have a flu. It's manageable. If I start being a bit too active, I'm doing too much, I need a couple days recovery, but I've got a pretty good system now of working and resting. I'm in an office in my new place currently where my girlfriend, as I said, like, I don't really need an office because I can't sit up all day. It's like, what if we just get you an office with a bed in it? It's like, oh, that's perfect. That was such a simple idea that I never thought of. So now I've got a separate workspace so I don't have that bleed between my bedroom and just for, your own mental health.
I also hope that you name your first special an office with a bed in it. There's some.
Oh my God, that's perfect. That's I've got to record that now. That's But yeah, so for the most part, it's just, the same way you would work when you have a flu, but an important project. You get a little bit done, you take a little bit of a nap, you get back to it. I'm not able to do as many stand-up shows as I'd like at the moment, but I still do run a monthly show, and I have a good team I work with that's able to help me do it all. I work with, we're all co-producers. It's not like I'm in charge or anything. But so yeah, the manifestation at this point is mostly, you take it easy, you take things slow, you work, you rest, you write. And at this point, it's manageable. We're also trying some new treatment options that are looking encouraging. So hopefully I'll be back doing more shows next year.
Nice. Well, I feel like, knowing this gives me more insight into your love of fantastical worlds, of world building, and your comedic persona as character. I don't have anything near what you have gone through in your life, but just as a, growing up pretty sheltered, pretty socially awkward, and kind of learning about the world through media, learning about conversation through talk shows. I'm always trying to recreate an element of that in everyday life.
Well, I absolutely. I think you nailed it perfectly. And I think you know the hang after a show is often the funniest part of the night. And it's interesting because sometimes you get there and it's comedians competing with each other, where it's everyone's trying to laugh at each other. And it is funny, but it also can be a lot. And sometimes, you're all a bit tired, you're drained, but you're just funny people. And I think that can be so great when you get people playing off each other instead of trying to win it.
Yeah. And instead of projecting the character, some people don't stop projecting the character. And that's never a good sign, honestly.
That's true. I remember, I had just done like my first or second open mic, but I'd already been writing for a couple of years. So I knew people in the comedy scene. I was hanging out just off to the side with some comics at a show, and I was just talking with a guy there who I hadn't seen perform yet. And we were just having a nice, casual, fun conversation. And he got on stage, and it was the most insane character who was just yelling everything. And he killed. He had a great set. But then he came back off and he just talked to me. And I was like, oh, of course you're not like that in real life. You're a normal human being and this is your job. But the world building in your head, what you're hoping to see, what you're trying to create. And when I started writing scripts, I had this, what I originally deemed to be a problem. Every comedy ended up being a fantasy script.
Okay, yeah. What kind of fantasy? I know the Buffy part, but what other fantasy were you obsessed with? And what are examples of the fantasy element that would pop in?
Yeah, so I was always big into mythology and history, which was why, we created the podcast in the first place. Was like, cool, this is a chance for me to just research a ton of weird history, get some niche stuff. I think also, thankfully, this is something I've lost. But as a kid, I really wanted people to see me as smart. And now as a comedian, it's like, if I get the laugh, I don't care if you think I'm an idiot. I'm happy to play a character where at the end, you're like, this was the dumbest guy I've ever seen. But as a kid, I wasn't going for necessarily the funniest joke, but I wanted to know the history because I wanted to make it more clever. And it was just a waste. That's not what matters. Now I want to know the history because I want to make the joke better. I want to understand it. So it's a lot of mythology stuff. Currently my favorite script, I sent it to Ed Solomon, who did, Men in Black. Oh, yeah. Because he'd been, he's fantastic. He's the nicest guy. He'd been really encouraging of me. And I remember him talking about Men in Black. And he said he was told he couldn't do a sci-fi comedy. He had to pick one. And I said, look, I've got this fantasy comedy script. Is this too much? And he gave me some very helpful notes. The script was nowhere near ready, obviously, but he's like, you got something here. But in this case, it was mythology. It was just these two immortal characters. I got to put in flashbacks between different points in history. I got to deal with different gods and demons. And it was a lot of fun to research and write. And it was one where it was early on in my writing process. And I took like 2 years figuring it out in my head instead of just sitting down and writing, which is what I should have done. But I was like, I need to understand these characters perfectly. So yeah, that was Myths and Legends is the name of that one. And it's still going through another round of rewrites. But, I have a writing partner, Mike Tannenbaum, who I do animated scripts with. And one we're working on, he's like, I kind of want to do a coming of age story. And I said, cool, what if we do it, but it is the first fish to walk on land? And he's like, okay, tell me more. I'm like, because it has to be weird, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we have this animated one, and it just was one of those where it kept being like, well, if we're doing that, it has to be an adventure, and once they get on land, it has to turn out that there are other things there They just didn't realize this. So this slowly became this coming of age story of these two kids to these two, evolutionary fish, human hybrid things. Oh God, the latest one that I just finished the first draft on was time travel for tourists. And this was one where I really wrote it thinking like, this might just be for me, because I wanted to do an time travel show so I could get a little bit of history, but I wanted to make it an office comedy. I wanted time travel to be almost insignificant. Like, what would it be like if you had to deal with your normal office politics, but at a company dealing with the fact that they might change the timeline anytime they make a mistake?
Yeah.
So I wrote it, and the notes I got back were like, this is good. It needs more time travel. You can't call it this and leave it all out.
Yeah. Well, I think it's great that you're doing all this stuff, and I hope that you're finding genuine joy in doing all this stuff, because we live in this time where, especially now, so many things are getting consolidated, less and less things are being made. And so even this is going to turn into free jazz for a second. I already know it. Because we're talking about joke construction, story construction. And I listen to a lot of podcasts and things with writers who write novels and short story collections and things like that. And I am, especially since the pandemic and since the writer's strike, I have entered this in-between phase of basically everything.
Right.
because the means of production are so insane right now, so chaotic and incredibly unpredictable. So I find myself asking, okay, I wrote this script, and I'm really happy that I wrote this script. Is the fact that it's possibly never going to be produced a hindrance to my enjoyment of the script? Like, should this be its final form? But knowing how much you've loved this stuff since you were a kid, and how these things were like your portal into the world, how do you navigate that? Do you have an internal system that guides you through these things?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're killing this podcast host. It is interesting because it's not like I've successfully sold a script here. There's been I've in the beginning you enter it in some contest. Once you sort out the 95% that are obviously scams, I've gotten enough good feedback that I feel like, okay, I think I'm on to something here. But I think I had finished my first script when I found out that you're not doing this to sell it. You're doing it to show what you can do to get hired to write for another show. Yeah. And I think for me, I love the creation process that I have definitely had to adjust it a little bit and be like, this is satisfying even if nothing comes of it. This is a cool thing to create. Also, I'm so happy to see so many people creating their own stuff independently now, where I definitely have had thoughts more like, you know what, just write a short instead. And that is one I'm doing with Mike Tannenbaum, my animated writing partner, so we can get a short self-produced, because, we know the industry was never great and is now at kind of its worst in terms of getting something new made, especially the way you want it. So it's nice seeing people, making their own things. Niles Abston, I love following his career. He was just in Chicago, and I miss him like every time he comes here, because I have a show the same night he has a show. He just released his short 98 Honda, and he had his stand-up specials go big on YouTube. So I feel at the moment it's write something, assuming it won't get made, and if you can figure out a way to make a shorter version or a cheaper version yourself later on, the process, you're learning new skills, you're getting better. It's not going to hurt anything to be a better writer at the end of this process, even if nothing comes of it.
You have reached a pretty incredible level of success of your own creation. I mean, you've got an office with a bed in it.
Yeah. That's the dream.
And I feel like you must have been incredibly prepared for the pandemic, and incredibly prepared for the world that it opened up, of this internet focused and reliant world that we have been in ever since. And so now you've got an interesting comedy company. How did this start, and how does it work?
So it's interesting. Yeah, it's a comedy-focused social media marketing firm called Persona Essential. And it's very weird, because I started out, again, writing jokes on social media, and felt like, okay, well, now it's time to up it, go to stand up, and this will be your way to get a writing job on a TV show. And I instead went back to where I started with social media writing. Yeah, I'd been working freelance for some companies and some bigger companies. I was writing with Netflix and NASDAQ. And
wait, you were writing jokes for NASDAQ? Can you explain that?
Yeah, that was a strange one. They had an interview series for founders that was basically when their company was going to go public and join NASDAQ, this would be interviewing. So I had a social media presence. They're like, make it a little funny, but just write us some content to interview people. So it's like, oh, cool. I get to research them. I get to learn some backgrounds. I get to write engaging questions. And so certainly less comedy writing, but there are ways to make it a bit funny and entertaining. And I just kept seeing that these companies, when they would get something going good with comedy, they'd be like, okay, cool, let's show them the serious stuff now. And I kept being like, that's not what they're here for. They'll try your product because you're entertaining. You don't need to convince them. If you make them like you enough, they'll want to try it just because they think you're cool. It's the same way you supposedly get people to start doing drugs. It's just tell them they'll be cool if they're a part of this. So I left last year, the freelance, and decided to start my own company that was working in part with founders, where it was like they needed people to like them because they're trying to get investors. So it was like, look, let's do some ghostwriting for you. Let's make you likable and appealing. And then we just kind of morphed into working in other spaces and working on some of these viral campaigns where, companies would come to us and say, like, we need 50 million impressions. Can you make that happen? And it was like, yeah, let me call my funniest friends. Let's just make this happen. So we're just coming up in our first year. We'll be in April, and we've had some fantastic growth and getting more and more new clients, and it's great. I'm getting to write jokes, and obviously with your own company, you get to pick products that you actually think this is a cool idea. This is something I want to help, and I really like working with startups because it's like they can use our help. If you've got a product that you really think is cool, and I can help people learn about it, great. That's just fun.
And it's let's be clear, this is also very weird. I'm sure it is.
Oh yeah,
and I love the weirdness of it.
Yeah, it's so weird too, and I'm also like I'm getting older. I just have to do the math. I just turned 38, and it's like I'm writing social media jokes. I know what's funny. I know it works, but also if you're writing for 18-year-olds, the stuff I find funny isn't what they find funny necessarily, and there's a whole different world based on whether you're on Twitter or Instagram or Reddit. So I've also got this team of fantastic writers working with me, but also 19-year-olds who are using slang I don't understand. And they'll send me a joke, and I'm like, okay, explain to me the 9 things this is referencing. And he's like, okay, this is about this and this and this. And I'm like, oh, great. Well, that's incredibly funny then. Let's send it to him. Let's put it up. Let's do it.
And I feel like it fits the Chicago aesthetic as well. Like, it's very fitting that you're there because that's where things like The Onion and I'm sure, opinions about these places have changed over the years, and the AV Club and all of these things, they have this DIY feeling to it. Like, this is the place where we're just making comedy happen. We're not just...
It is very interesting. And I was looking, right before I started the company, I was looking to move to LA. And I thought I had just gotten out of my last relationship and felt like, you know what, I'm ready to pursue this. I've wanted to get in TV writing for a while. Let me do this. And then it just kind of all very suddenly pivoted. I'm like, I've got this idea and I think I can make it work. And it's dumb to spend money on a move to a more expensive city when you're trying to start a new company. So let me stay here and give this a shot first. And yeah, if you could find the clients that will trust in funny, and obviously you have to work with them and help them understand why this is a good strategy and what you can do for them. And you have to really understand the different platforms and the markets. And thankfully I've got a team that I can really depend on for that. So it's been great. It's one where it's like, okay, this is, starting a new company is expensive, but this is going to work. We've had enough success that it was like, this was worth the risk.
And it feels like this is you reaching a form of acceptance of that first official pursuit of yours, which was social media comedy.
Yeah, I think it was weird that I originally saw this as a launching platform instead of being like, this is where everybody already is. This is, if it's very cool to write a joke and watch it be seen by millions of people. And once you can have a little bit of that distance of like, you care less if, they know that you're the one that made it. You just like seeing it go. And, there are challenges too with Twitter having gone so far downhill since Elon Musk took over. It's disappointing that there's not that same space for pure comedy anymore. The algorithm has shifted. It doesn't encourage you to just be funny. It encourages you to tap into certain metrics and things like that. So it's, there are still challenges. It's why people go to TikTok. It's why people do crowd work clips. But I think it's been good for me to get that mix too, where it's like, okay, that it helped me get that separation of this is my day job now. So now I can enjoy writing the scripts when I'm off work. I can enjoy getting to go do a stand-up show because it starts to feel fun again instead of the pressure of I've got to hit this deadline the way it used to.
Well, it's great. I'm so happy for you.
Thanks so much.
And I also love things like this because when you listen to those old interviews with old comics where they're like, and then I wrote jokes for this radio show that no one has ever.
Right. Yeah.
I feel like that's these weird internet things are the modern equivalent of that. Like I wrote jokes for a soap company or
right. Well, and it's so strange too, because as you know, with the industry today, it's you can't just be good at one thing in comedy. It was okay, I'm doing short form, so now I'm going to do stand up, and then I started a comic strip where it was
about the Grim Reaper and his son.
The Grim and Graham, a Grim Reaper trainee, but it was just one where it was like you keep feeling like you have to do everything. I was like, well, now I got to learn sketch, and improv is the one that I have still refused to start doing. Because I like the writing, I have no interest in it. I like preparing it. But yeah, you feel like you have to be so good at so many different aspects. God, I took magic lessons because I had an idea for a bit on stage where someone is supposed to bring out my hat with, the rabbit in it.
Yeah.
And they inform me that the rabbit has died. So I just have an emotional breakdown as I try and do a card trick.
I love that. Oh man, I love that.
So I had to learn magic. I had to learn a card trick that was legitimately good enough to work. So anyway, the point was like, yeah, you do a bit of everything. And if you can start adapting it as like, you learn new fun skills. You don't know what's going to go where, but now I spend most of my time doing like agility exercises instead of playing on my phone to get better at these magic tricks. So yeah, if you can find new ways to write, new ways to be creative, it's always going to end up helping you in some way.
Amazing. I've written many bad SNL packets over the years.
Oh yeah.
One of my favorite, and I wrote one where it's like Bill Maher at a black cookout. Why would that? What was that for? What age? And then
but that's so funny too. Where it's like those ones where it's like, okay, this is never going to be on air, but there's so much there. That's a good idea.
And then one that I think about often because joy is a frightening thing to me for some reason.
Really?
Yeah, like pure fun.
Yeah. Don't care for it.
Once I see it, I know that there's a sinister underbelly.
Sure.
And so one where Ellen DeGeneres finds out that her house is on fire right before she goes out and starts dancing on her show. Like
that's so funny.
Like that thing of like something sad has happened, but you still have to do this thing.
Right.
Yeah.
God, I've been rewatching Veep, which I think is such a perfect example of the faces you put out there versus how horrible people are inside. And Armando Iannucci just always has that perfect contrast of something absolutely insane and horrific and filthy. Like the language is so disturbing, mixed with either the best or the worst news they've ever heard. And it's crazy the contrast he gets in there. But I feel like that's what the best comedy is. It's that contrast.
I'm sure you've had that. You've done a show when something tragic has happened in your life, or like, you know.
I recorded a podcast episode the day after my dad died. And both the guests and my co-hosts were like, we can wait. You know, we don't have to do this today. And I'm like, you know what? I'm really sad. It'd be nice to hear something funny. Let's and it ended up being a good episode. And that was one of the concerns too, is that you can't just do it for you. Ultimately, you're a performer. You know, it doesn't work if you're just funny for you. But I realized I had a couple dead dad jokes I'd written before he died, and were ones like it took me like 6 months before I could tell those. But it's there's always that contrast, and if you can find a way to make pain funny, and I think that's always been the goal too, is that especially when you are dealing with chronic illness and any challenges, it's not like this controls the market on, and everyone's got something horrible happening in their life. And if sometimes when you feel like, all right, I can't laugh, but I can make someone else laugh, that's a great feeling. You know,
as much as you hate improv, Andrew, I've been I try every podcast interview, I wait for a moment where it feels like a herald, you know?
Yeah, right.
And you saying that you wrote dead dad jokes before your dad actually passed away makes me think back to you looking for the perfect joke to say once the perfect thing happened. I'm not saying, you know what I mean? Like this is.
I'll tell you too, the most competitive I'd ever been in my writing was writing his eulogy, because I have two sisters who are both good writers, not comedy writers, but they both wrote and performed poetry nationally. And I was like, I had just kind of transitioned into this being a career, and he'd been supportive. And I was like, all right, I got to show that I can do this. And it was like, it was during COVID. So it was over Zoom. And I had given my eulogy like an hour earlier, and someone else started to speak, and he started choking up, and he couldn't talk. And he said, damn it, Andrew, I thought about what you said. And I thought I just won my dad's funeral. Like wow. this was an hour earlier, and I'm still making this guy cry. And it was probably the most helpful thing I had in processing all of this. Was it gave me something to focus on and get stupidly competitive about. and give me that little spark of joy in this really hard situation.
Yeah. And I don't know if this means anything, but I always feel like the best jokes or the best nights of comedy or the best shows in some way feel like a funeral. I don't know what that means.
Really?
Yeah. That sort of catharsis, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting too, because there is that definitely when you see a great show where someone is just like, wow, they had a lot they had to get out.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm glad we were here for it.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Thanks for doing the show.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It was a blast.
And that's the show. Big thanks to Andrew Nadeau for stopping by via the internet. For more information about him, follow him on Twitter and check out personaessential.com. Freddie Nunez created and sings the You Are the Genre theme song, and Adam Smith produced it. And don't forget, paid subscribers can look forward to advanced episodes coming out this week. This is Tim Barnes signing off with your weekly reminder that you are the genre.
First I got your voicemail, then I got you. We can meet in person or maybe on Zoom. So tell me what's your genre, tell me what do you do. I'd like to know the things that specifically make